They say the river remembers, not in words or images but in silt and silence, in how it twists and flows, reshaping the land around it, whispering old names through the creaking mangroves and sandstone ravines. The Hawkesbury is such a river, older than the colonies, older than names on maps. It carves its way through New South Wales like a scar long since scabbed over, always present, rarely questioned. It slinks between towns and cliffs, pretending to be tame but never truly docile. And beneath its dark surface, they say, something waits. It starts with a sound, a splash too heavy to be a fish, the stillness of water suddenly parting as if something vast and very much alive shifts below. No birds call in these moments, no insects hum, just that thick, breathless hush, like the earth itself is holding still. Then the ripples fade, the surface calms, and whatever was there returns to its depths. Some say it's only the play of light, the mischief of wind on water. Others know better. They've seen things they don't like to speak of in the daytime. The Hawkesbury River winds north of Sydney, a watercourse born of rain and runoff, but carrying something heavier than fresh water. It runs for hundreds of kilometers, its banks framed by steep cliffs and thick bush, dotted with sleepy towns and echoes of a life that once thrived with oars, nets, and quiet dread. For the Darug and Ku-ring-gai peoples, the river was never just a source of food or transport. It was sacred, alive, a dreaming track that pulsed with spirits and stories passed down in ochre and song. They tell of creatures in the water, beings with weight and will. Not beasts, but presences. Ones you gave space to, ones you didn't name aloud. When Europeans arrived in the late 18th century, they saw the river through different eyes. They mapped it, fished it, ferried timber down its length. But even they, in their ledgers and journals, left room for the unknown. Some wrote of a serpent in the water, seen curling between shadows. Others mentioned strange wakes in still bays, large enough to rock small boats. In 1821, a colonial diary records a serpentine thing, black as pitch and thrice the length of my cutter, sliding silently across the morning mist. The entry ends with a single line. We made for shore at once. The stories gathered, like fog over the current, always the same shape, though the details shifted. A long neck, rising smooth and slow above the surface. A body wide as a barrel and moving with impossible grace. Eyes that reflected nothing. Some said it had fins. Others, ridges along its back like the remnants of wings. Those who saw it never forgot, and those who hadn't kept their eyes on the water all the same. There's a place near Mooney Mooney Bridge, where the river bends sharp and deep. Locals say that's where the creature likes to rest. A shadow in the water that surfaces now and then when the fog is thick and the air goes still. One old fisherman, long since passed, swore on his life that he saw it rise just once, one winter morning in 1946. He was pulling traps when he noticed the water ahead bulge like something rising beneath it. Then a shape, no more than 10 meters away, emerged. He described it as smooth-skinned, dark as oil, with a neck that arched and dipped like a swan's, only thicker, heavier. He said it watched him for a moment, unblinking, before sinking back into the deep with barely a ripple. He never went out alone again. Skeptics scoff, of course. They point to tricks of the light, to floating logs, to groups of animals swimming in line. A pod of seals, perhaps, or a few eels. They say the brain fills in gaps when the light is low and the water unfamiliar. But those who've lived on the river all their lives, those whose boots have worn paths to the same battered jetties every morning, they know the river's moods. They know what a seal looks like, and they know when something isn't right. The river isn't a lake. It moves, it changes. Tides shift, currents twist. The water near the bottom runs cold and silent, while the surface bakes under the harsh Aussie sun. There are pockets, deep holes, some say bottomless, where silt has buried time itself. Bones have surfaced from those depths before. Old anchors, animal remains, even bits of boats thought lost to storms. What else lies down there, unmoved for millennia? What might still breathe beneath all that pressure, all that silence? A theory has bloomed over the years, carried by cranks and cryptozoologists, but also by those who simply believe what they've seen. They speak of plesiosaurs, prehistoric marine reptiles with long necks and broad bodies, thought to have died out with the dinosaurs. But what if one survived, hidden in some forgotten trench, evolving in secrecy? It's a comforting thought in a strange way, that something ancient and untouched might still be out there, unbothered by us. And then there's the matter of connection. The Monstro do Lago Ness, Nessie, has long held the public's fascination. But Australia's version, born of Aboriginal lore and settler fear, feels rawer, less polished by tourism or hoaxes. It belongs to the land, to the river, and the river, in turn, keeps it close, revealing it only to those it chooses. Boats still vanish now and then, not in dramatic explosions or horror film theatrics, but quietly, mysteriously. A kayak found drifting, its paddles sunk. A line of buoys pulled underwater and never seen again. Each time the whispers start anew. Each time, someone remembers a story their grandfather told them, sitting by the fire, too low to overhear but too vivid to forget. The Hawkesbury holds secrets. It always has. Not loud ones, not the kind that scream for attention. Just quiet, patient mysteries that wait in the shallows or stir the reeds when no one's watching. Whether it's a creature, a memory, or a spirit, one thing is certain: the river is never truly still. And if you listen closely, really listen, you might hear the water murmuring a name it won't say out loud. There's a bend just north of Spencer, where the river widens into a shallow breath before folding in on itself again. Fishermen call it Deadwater Reach, not because anything sinister ever happened there, but because the current dies and the air thickens, like the river's holding its breath. Locals tell you the stories in hushed tones, half laughing, but always watching your eyes when they speak, gauging if you'll dismiss it all as folklore, or if you'll lean in, as if trying to hear what they don't say aloud. One such story belongs to Marjorie Tate. She's old now, older than most of the houses still standing in her part of the river, but sharp as the hawks that circle overhead. She lives in a weather-beaten shack nestled in the bush, not far from a crumbling jetty that disappears in high tide. She doesn't like company, but if you catch her on a calm morning with a thermos of black tea and no wind, she might tell you what she saw in 1953. She was 16 then, rowing across the inlet just before dawn, cutting the water with slow, practiced strokes. Fog clung low, dense as wool, and every sound bounced strangely off the banks. As she neared the middle, the water beside her seemed to lift, not bubble, not splash, just rise like something immense was surfacing in slow motion. She froze, oars held high, and from that swell, a shape emerged, long, curved, like the arch of a bridge, slick with water and breathing. It made no noise, no eyes, no teeth, just presence, and then it sank, deliberate and soundless, leaving the river still as a grave. Marjorie never told her parents, but she never rowed alone again. And to this day, she sleeps with the curtains drawn and a line of salt across her doorstep. Not for ghosts, she says, but for whatever dreams in the deep. Hers isn't the only tale. Ask around and you'll hear dozens, not from tourists or thrill-seekers, but from quiet folks who've worked this river their whole lives. A barge captain out near Wiseman's Ferry, who once saw something trailing his vessel for half an hour, visible just below the surface, too steady to be current, too large to be fish. A pair of campers at Lower Portland who heard breathing, low and heavy, just outside their tent by a river that shouldn't have lungs. A young couple kayaking near Bar Point, their GoPro capturing a shadow gliding beneath their boat, longer than any croc and moving against the tide. All of them carry the same undercurrent: disbelief, then awe, then unease. None of them want to prove anything. They aren't chasing clout or making documentaries. They just want to understand what brushed against their world and left no trace. In the 1970s, when cryptozoology took hold like a fever, a group calling themselves the Australian Cryptozoology Research Organisation mounted an expedition. 5 men, 2 boats, sonar equipment borrowed from a university, and more hope than plan. They spent weeks combing stretches of the Hawkesbury, scanning depths, logging sightings. They found little more than sediment and silence. But one night, near the confluence with Mangrove Creek, their sonar caught a shape. It moved, slow, deliberate, and was gone in seconds. No explanation, no follow-up, just one blip on a machine, and 5 men who never quite looked at water the same way again. The photos that surfaced over the years, blurry black and white stills, shaky video from early digital cams, have been picked apart endlessly. Most are dismissed. Logs, shadows, animals mistaken in motion. But a few defy easy dismissal. A frame from 1965 showing a distinct curve breaching the surface. A clip from 2004, taken by a tourist from Queensland, where something breaks the waterline for just a moment, wide and smooth, then vanishes. No scale, no certainty, just questions. And then there's the Aboriginal lore, older than any camera, any sonar. Stories passed not in books, but in sand drawings and campfire murmur. The Darug people speak of the Miriola, a water spirit said to dwell in the deep bends of the river. Not a monster, not quite. Something older, wiser, dangerous only when disrespected. Some say the settlers confused these spirits with beasts, that what they feared was not flesh and blood but the living memory of the land, rising in shape and shadow to remind them they were visitors. It's a theory not easily dismissed. After all, rivers in Aboriginal lore are more than water. They're arteries of the earth, channels of story and spirit. The Hawkesbury, with its winding form and hidden places, was always seen as powerful, sacred, and sacred things, when ignored or disturbed, tend to make themselves known. Not every sighting is dramatic. Some are quiet, fleeting. A shape slipping beneath the pier at dusk. A ripple that moves against the wind. A sudden silence among the birds. These moments don't make headlines, but they etch themselves into memory, shaping the way people move through this landscape. Slower, more careful, less certain of what belongs to whom. Tourism boards don't talk about the monster. It doesn't fit the postcard image of sailing weekends and houseboats. But among those who live by the water, who mend their nets in silence and watch the moon rise over the cliffs, the tale endured, not shouted, but whispered, passed from lips to ear, from grandparents to wide-eyed children who learn early that the river gives and the river takes, and so it remains. Not proven, not disproven, just present. Like a low hum beneath the surface of things, like a story that doesn't need believing to be true. Theories, like tides, come and go, sometimes flooding the mind with wild conviction, other veces recuando na maré do ceticismo. When it comes to the Hawkesbury River monster, the stories have outlived generations of doubters, and while some dismiss them as mere relics of folklore, others insist they point to something more tangible, an echo of ancient biology clinging to the edges of what we know. Of all the explanations offered, none stirs the imagination quite like the one whispered by torchlight and traded in pub corners. The plesiosaur. The name alone conjures images of deep time, of a world swamped in ferns and thunder, where massive reptiles ruled both land and sea. Plesiosaurs, with their long necks, paddle-like fins, and serpentine grace, supposedly vanished 66 million years ago. But what if they didn't? What if, in some forgotten trench, a pocket of them lingered, adapted, hid, survived? It's the kind of theory that science scoffs at, but that folklore hungrily devours. Those who support this idea often point to the similarities between descriptions of the Hawkesbury creature and the famed Nessie of Scotland. The long neck, the small head, the humped back surfacing in rhythmic intervals. Two rivers, half a world apart, but carrying legends that feel cut from the same ancient cloth. It's not proof, of course, nothing close. But the human mind isn't built to dismiss patterns so easily, especially when they come dressed in mystery. Yet science rarely bends to romance. Paleontologists argue that plesiosaurs were oceanic creatures, not river dwellers. That even if one somehow survived extinction, an isolated river like the Hawkesbury couldn't support a breeding population unnoticed for so long. They point to the absence of remains, no bones, no carcasses, no signs. But believers counter with the river's depth, its muddy cloak of secrecy. Things disappear here. Boats, nets, time. Then comes a more grounded theory, that the monster is not a relic of the Cretaceous, but a creature far more familiar. The long-finned eel, Anguilla reinhardti, is native to Australia and capable of growing to impressive lengths. While most top out at around a meter, there are unverified reports of eels reaching over 3 meters. Imagine one, swollen with age, adapted to the dark silences of a silted trench. Multiply that unease by movement, slow, undulating, alien in its rhythm, and you have something that, in the right light, might just look monstrous. Eels have always held a strange place in human psyche. Slippery, elusive, capable of vanishing from rivers and reappearing in oceans thousands of kilometers away. Their spawning grounds have never been conclusively mapped. It's as though they slip between worlds. Some even call them ghosts of the water. And if a particularly large one breached the surface at dusk, in that half-light where shadows stretch and details blur, what might a frightened fisherman see? Others suggest more terrestrial culprits. Seals, occasionally wandering upriver. Large rays, whose wings slice the water like dorsal fins. Or logs, caught in current, moved by wind and tide in ways that mimic life. There's merit in these ideas. Nature, after all, is no stranger to deception. But the question remains, how do you explain the consistency? The recurring shape, the behavior, the feeling shared by so many that they were being watched by something aware, something intentional. There's also the matter of sonar. Not all sightings rely on eyes alone. In 1998, a private survey conducted by a local environmental group attempting to map fish populations around Milson's Passage picked up a large mobile object in deep water. Too big for fish, too smooth for rock. It moved, slowly, then was gone. The equipment was checked, recalibrated, tested again. No anomaly, no explanation. Just a momentary blip that refused to be boxed. And let's not forget the oddities found by dredgers and divers. Unusual gouges in submerged rock. Deep scratches across sunken debris. A partially devoured stingray carcass hauled up near Dangar Island, bearing bite marks too wide for known species. None of this is definitive, but it adds weight, not in mass, but in tension. A quiet, persistent pressure that refuses to fade. Yet for all the possible culprits, for all the rational explanations, there remains something else. Something harder to name. A presence. People speak of it not in diagrams or taxonomy, but in feeling. An unease that settles like dew when the sun dips low and the river goes glassy. A sense that the water knows more than it tells. That something down there is old enough to remember when men still feared the dark. And perhaps that's the heart of it. Not the creature, but the quiet. The way the river silences everything when it stirs. The way even birds hold their breath. The way dogs whimper and refuse to enter the shallows. That's not biology. That's memory. Instinct. A kind of reverence born not of fairy tales, but of experience passed down like a scar. Because when the last light flees the cliffs and the water turns black, it's no longer about science or myth. It's about presence. The weight of something just beyond explanation, moving beneath your boat. Watching. Waiting. Some stories don't live in books or broadcast airwaves. They live in glances exchanged between old rivermen at the end of a shift. In the silence that follows a too long pause after someone says, "I saw something once." These aren't stories told for glory, they're confessions. And around the Hawkesbury, they accumulate like driftwood, small, silent, and strangely shaped. Take the 1965 sighting at Wiseman's Ferry, one of the best documented cases in a region not known for documentation. Arthur and Gladys Newcomb, retired school teachers, were picnicking by the bank. They weren't thrill seekers or eccentrics, just two ordinary people who happened to look up from their thermos as a ripple broke the mirror-still river. What they saw, they said, rose slowly, first a dark hump, then a long, slender neck topped with a narrow head. It lingered for nearly a minute, far too long for a trick of light. No splashing, no thrashing, just a slow turn of the head, as if regarding them in return, then a quiet descent back into stillness. Their report was detailed, handwritten, and reluctant. They waited days before telling anyone, and even then, it was only because Arthur, a stickler for truth, couldn't square the memory with silence. A local journalist published their account in the Hawkesbury Advocate, and for a while, the town hummed with speculation. Then, like the river does with rain, the story sank back beneath the surface. Another case, this time from 1987, involves a ferry operator named Len Baker. He was guiding his vessel across a stretch near Brooklyn when something large passed beneath the hull. It didn't strike or disrupt the ferry's path, but it was there. A shadow, long and solid, gliding counter to the current. Len didn't speak of it for years, not until cancer loomed and he started putting his life to tape. It wasn't fish, he muttered, voice cracked with age and something else. Fear, maybe, or awe. It moved like it knew we were above. For every Len and Gladys, there are dozens who never spoke, or who told their stories only once, in late-night confessionals with mugs of rum in hand. A teenager who dove from a rope swing and felt something brush against his leg. Thick, rough, alive. A night watchman who swears he saw eyes, yellow and wide, just above the waterline. A diver who quit mid-job after descending into a trench near Pete's Ferry and coming up shaking, refusing to explain why. You can write off any one of these tales, but the weight of them, together, builds something harder to ignore. That weight was what led a group of amateur researchers to organize another search in the spring of 2002. They called themselves the Hawkesbury Depth Survey Initiative, 4 mates with a borrowed boat and enough curiosity to fuel sleepless nights. Their gear was modest: a sonar unit, a camcorder, hydrophones rigged from a university surplus sale. They weren't chasing fame, just a glimpse, a sound, anything. For 3 nights, they drifted near the deeper parts of the river, casting sensors and whispering theories. The recordings were uneventful until night 4, when the hydrophones picked up a rhythmic, low-frequency pulse, steady, like a heart, but too deep to be boat engines or sonar reflections. Then came a sound unlike anything they expected, a drawn-out exhalation, long and heavy, as if something had surfaced to breathe. The camcorder captured nothing but fog, but the recording, it still exists. Grainy, faint, but unmistakably real. They called it the breath, and to this day, none of them have returned to the river after dark. And through it all, the Aboriginal stories persist, not as cryptid lore, but as truth grounded in tradition. Elders from the Ku-ring-gai community tell of a being that lives beneath the river's skin, not evil, but powerful, a guardian or a judge. It has many names, none spoken lightly. It appears not to frighten, but to warn. When the land is disrespected, when balance is broken, it rises. Not always to act, sometimes only to remind. These stories were never meant to be literal, not in the Western sense. They're maps of meaning, markers of relationship between people and place. But when those meanings are echoed by sightings, when modern descriptions mirror ancient warnings, something deeper begins to stir. Not in the river, in us. We start to wonder, not just if the creature exists, but why we're drawn to the possibility, why we want to believe in things that watch us from the dark. Maybe it's because the world we've built feels too small, too bright, and rivers like the Hawkesbury still offer shadows wide enough for monsters to stretch their limbs. And maybe it's because, despite our satellites and science, we still don't know everything. Not really. Especially not about the places we can't see, where sunlight dies and pressure builds and things older than memory might still breathe. To speak of monsters is to speak of mirrors, of what we see and what we fear, of how landscapes shape not just terrain but thought. And when it comes to the Hawkesbury, what's reflected in those dark waters isn't just the twisted silhouette of eucalypts or the stretch of sandstone rising from the shore. It's us, our questions, our quiet dreads. The river has become more than a body of water. It's become a mind, fluid, ancient, and unwilling to give straight answers. In the heart of Brooklyn, a pub clings to the banks where ferries idle and fishers trade yarns. Inside, nailed to the wall between framed photos of old regattas and sepia-toned maps, is a curious painting. It's rough, done by hand, brushstrokes clumsy but earnest. It shows the river under moonlight, silvered and still. And breaking that stillness, rising from the middle distance, is a shape that could be anything, or everything. It has the arched back, the pale eye, the long, tapering neck that haunts the edges of countless recollections. Beneath the painting, a plaque reads, "Don't laugh too loud." She listens. The regulars don't talk much about the painting, but everyone knows who painted it: Jimmy Carruthers. He was a deckhand, then a boat builder, then just a man with quiet eyes who drank alone and watched the river more than most. He never claimed to have seen the creature. But after his wife died in '89, he took to wandering the banks at night. Said the river calmed his thoughts. Then, one spring, he brought in the painting, said nothing, and hung it where it's remained ever since. 2 years later, he vanished. His boat was found drifting near the bend at Bar Point. No signs of struggle. No note. Just his thermos, still warm, and a single oar bobbing against the hull. People remember things like that, not because they prove anything, but because they linger. Like the stories. Like the scents. The Hawkesbury is more than water. It's a witness. It's seen the shift from bark canoes to outboard motors, from smoking ceremonies to sonar scans, from sacred dreaming to digital doubt. And still it holds its shape, winding patiently, keeping what it chooses. Its depths are geological time in motion, millions of years layered in mud and memory. And in that weight, the myth of the monster takes root, not just as curiosity, but as resistance. A quiet rebellion against the idea that everything can be named, mapped, explained. Scientists have tried. Not just the local cryptid hunters or late-night YouTubers, but real marine biologists, ecologists, sonar technicians. Some have laughed. Others have paused, just long enough to wonder. A 2011 study on migratory aquatic species noted unusual sonar readings near the river's deeper sections, suggesting something large was moving against the current at unexpected intervals. No species was identified. The data was archived. The river flowed on. But not all attempts to probe the unknown have been so clinical. In 2017, a group of drone enthusiasts launched a project called Eyes Over the Hawkesbury. They set out to capture aerial footage of suspected monster hotspots, deep bends, remote inlets, places locals rarely name. Their footage captured plenty: gliding rays, startled birds, abandoned boats, half swallowed by reeds. But in one clip, barely a second long, something else appears. A wake, oddly shaped, moving in a way inconsistent with wind or boat trails. It curves, deliberate, smooth. Too fast for logs, too steady for fish. It sparked online debates, breakdowns, slow-motion replays. Nothing conclusive, but the tension remained. That electric hum of possibility. And then there's the folklore. Aboriginal dreaming doesn't draw clean lines between the physical and the spiritual. Stories are layered. A creature might be real, symbolic, ancestral, all at once. The beings of water in Darug tradition are not beasts, but custodians. Some protect, others test. All exist beyond the lens of Western comprehension. To ask, is it real, misses the point. It has always been real, because it has always mattered. This isn't Loch Ness. No souvenir stands, no staged photos. The monster of the Hawkesbury has no name in the newspapers. It doesn't want fame. It wants silence, reverence. It slips through time the way it slips through water, without effort, without trace. And yet, those who've known the river longest carry it with them, not like a memory, like a weight in the lungs, like a presence behind you, just out of sight. So what then is the monster? An ancient reptile lost to time, a giant eel twisted into legend, a guardian spirit shaped by the land, or maybe simply a feeling, a deep, aching sense that not everything should be seen, and not everything seen should be understood. And perhaps that's what keeps the legend alive. Not just the sightings, the sonar, the shaky footage, but the river itself, its shape, its silence, its refusal to yield. For in a world obsessed with visibility, the Hawkesbury dares to remain obscure, and whatever moves within it, whatever slips past our understanding, reminds us that mystery, like water, finds its way into everything. When you live close to something long enough, be it land, water, or story, it stops being background. It becomes character, mood. It presses into your bones in ways you don't always notice until you've been away. That's how it is with the Hawkesbury. Ask anyone who's left the river for good, and they'll tell you, it follows. Not in sound or sight, but in a tug under the ribs. A weight, like a whisper you can't quite shake. In this stretch of the story, we reach the point where the river becomes less a setting and more a living entity, a presence. The kind that can change a person, not through violence or spectacle, but by how it makes them wait, watch, doubt. There are entire communities along the Hawkesbury whose lives are built on tides, whose routines bend around water levels and boat schedules, and whose stories of the creature have been folded quietly into everyday speech. They don't speak of it like a threat. They speak of it like weather. Unpredictable, respected, unavoidable. A former police constable, Eric Dunbar, worked the Wiseman's Ferry area during the 1990s. Calm man, practical. The kind who kept a clean desk and never indulged in talk of ghosts or bush spirits. He handled disputes, floods, the occasional missing person. Nothing out of the ordinary, until one evening in July, when a call came in about a capsized dinghy found circling slowly near Lower Portland, the engine still idling. No sign of the fishermen who'd left the docks that morning, no signs of struggle, just the boat, and a cooler full of untouched bait. Dunbar followed protocol. He documented, interviewed, logged every step, but something stayed with him. Not the boat, but the silence. There was no disturbance, he later recalled. No debris. No footprints on shore. Just stillness, like something had come and gone. Quiet, deliberate. He left the force 4 years later, moved inland, took up carpentry. But in a recorded interview for a local oral history project, he finally said what he hadn't before. "I don't know what's in that river," he muttered, eyes down. "But I know what isn't. And what isn't is peace." That kind of statement might sound cryptic, poetic even. But around the Hawkesbury, it lands with weight. Because peace, true, deep, river peace, comes only when nothing moves. And when something stirs that shouldn't, the entire landscape seems to brace. There's a particular stretch between Pete's Ferry and Spencer where this tension sharpens. Locals call it the wedge. Narrow, deep, flanked by cliffs that catch and echo every sound. Some say it's where the current goes strange, where compasses drift slightly, and even GPS devices occasionally misfire. An amateur diver named Rachel Miles explored it once. Curious, experienced, and unbothered by ghost tales. She came up fast after 15 minutes. Not because of equipment failure or fear of drowning, but because something below had moved. Not near her, but around her. Big, silent, and slow. She described it as pressure, not presence. Like the water changed, she said later. Like it wasn't water anymore. Like it was watching. That phrase recurs often. Like it was watching. Not attacking. Not chasing. Just witnessing. There's something unnerving about that. We're used to being the observers. When the gaze turns back, the rules change. Perhaps that's why the monster, if it is one, resists the spotlight. It doesn't roar. Doesn't leave bodies. It simply exists. Out of reach, but never out of mind. It's not performance. It's presence. The way bushfire smoke lingers long after the flames die. The way the land remembers every footprint ever pressed into its soil. Even among those who've never seen it, the creature shapes behavior. Parents warn their kids to keep clear of certain jetties at dusk. Fishermen pack up early when the water gets too calm. Some avoid anchoring in spots said to be hollow, where sonar readings dip unpredictably. It's not fear that drives them, it's etiquette. A kind of quiet pact between river and resident. Every few years someone tries to break that pact. A thrill seeker. A journalist looking for a scoop. They come with drones, with high-tech depth scanners, with big plans and bigger egos. They stay for a week, maybe 2. Film what they can, interview the locals, stir up the water, and then they leave, usually empty-handed, often changed, not frightened but sobered, as if they've glimpsed something vast and uncaring, not hostile, just unmoved by their attention. Because if the monster of the Hawkesbury exists, it doesn't need us. It's not a story built for proof. It's a creature of silence, of mud-thick time and cool, dark currents. It doesn't want names. It doesn't crave witness. It simply is, and And that's perhaps the most unsettling part. Not that something might be down there, but that it might be there forever, with no desire to be known, no need to be understood, just enduring, watching, waiting. Memory, like water, doesn't always move in straight lines. It loops, erodes, pools in strange places. Along the Hawkesbury, this truth takes form not just in the meandering current, but in the way stories circle back, pulling new generations into old currents. The line between what happened and what's believed grows soft, blurred by time and tide. What remains isn't chronology, it's weight, a heaviness in the gut, a sense that something old is still unfinished. In the early 1900s, newspapers were thinner and slower, but even then, the river whispered through their columns. The Windsor and Richmond Gazette printed a letter in 1908 from a Reverend Milton A. Croft, a visiting English clergyman with a fondness for solitude and morning walks. He described seeing a peculiar undulating motion on the surface of the water, as if some immense thing were swimming just beneath, with the grace of an eel but the mass of a beast. He didn't call it a monster. Didn't draw conclusions. He simply wrote what he saw, and ended his letter with a line that has lingered ever since. I felt I had witnessed something not meant for eyes, least of all mine. This recurring humility, this quiet surrender to the unknown, is a thread that runs through nearly every account worth trusting. The loud ones, the sensationalists, always fall flat. But the quiet stories, the reluctant confessions, those hold a different kind of gravity. Take Elsie Lorraine. Born in 1922, she lived her entire life in a riverfront cottage near Webb's Creek. She fished, painted, never married. In her final years, when her voice was nearly gone and her hands no longer steady, she gave an interview to a regional folklore student. Her voice, soft and slow, scratched across the tape like dry leaves. "It's not what people think," she said. "It's not a beast, not a threat. It's part of the river, same as sand and silt. It don't like noise or cameras, but it watches. And it remembers. That last bit haunts those who've heard the tape. It remembers. As if the creature, or whatever it is less an animal and more a witness, a living echo of everything the river has ever held. Flood, fire, ritual, blood. And maybe that's what draws people back to the mystery, generation after generation. Not the thrill of danger, but the pull of recognition, of being seen by something ancient and unburdened by human questions. And in this intimacy, this near-religious reverence, there are patterns. The creature is most often seen at dawn or dusk, when light softens and certainty fades. The sightings cluster near old places, ferry points, Aboriginal fishing ground, spots where the land still carries the quiet of old footsteps. And the water in these places? Always unusually still, glass-like, reflective not just of sky but of something deeper. In 2005, a documentary crew from Brisbane came to the river. They planned a feature on Australia's cryptids, complete with dramatic music and CGI renderings of mythical beasts. They spent a week filming, interviewing locals, even diving with underwater drones. The footage, once aired, was flashy but shallow, a predictable montage of suspenseful music and blurry shadows. But what the cameras missed, the crew didn't forget. During a night shoot near Mangrove Creek, their sound technician, a quiet man named Joel, pulled his headphones off halfway through a session. Pale, trembling. He refused to say what he'd heard, only that it wasn't man, wasn't machine, and wasn't something he ever wanted to hear again. He left the next morning without a word, caught the first bus north, and never worked on another river project again. These cracks in the surface, sudden departures, silences, withdrawals, are as telling as any evidence. They speak of something beyond explanation, a boundary crossed, a presence felt too closely. And while science demands repeatability, measurement, confirmation, the river offers only suggestion. A shape here, a breath there, a sound half heard beneath the drone of cicadas. It offers nothing to those who demand, and everything to those who listen. In this way, the Hawkesbury Monster is less creature, more confessor, a witness to the quiet wrongs and buried histories of a place too often walked through but rarely heard. It rises not with anger, but with memory. Not to punish, but to remind. That's why the stories won't die. Why the legends don't fade with time, but deepen. Because the river is not passive. It keeps its own counsel. And those who live beside it learn, in time, that the truest stories aren't shouted. They're whispered, or felt, or carried in the silence after something vast and unseen slips beneath the boat without a sound. There are places along the river where the air changes, where the stillness takes on weight, where sound seems to fall short of reaching the water. Locals know these places. They don't always mark them on maps, but they know. A rusted fence line half swallowed by bush, a stone cairn eroded into near absence, a jetty that no longer creaks because no one walks it anymore. These are the spots where stories are born without being spoken. In one such place, hidden between tangled banks upriver from Sackville, a boy named Martin Gale disappeared in 1974. 14. Adventurous, used to the water. He'd taken a small tinny out just after dawn, said he was going to check the crab pots. The boat was found drifting near a patch of thick reeds. Engine stalled, anchor still in place. No sign of struggle, no footprints on the nearby shore. Just an oilskin jacket folded neatly across the bench seat, as if placed there with care. He was never found. It would be easy, irresponsible even, to draw conclusions. Children vanish for many reasons, and rivers are as dangerous as they are beautiful. But in the years that followed, others came forward, quietly. A man walking his dog who saw ripples cutting against the current with unnatural speed. A camper who heard a low, thrumming hum beneath his feet as he stood on the riverbank, so deep he felt it in his teeth. A pair of teenagers who refused to repeat what they saw, only that they wouldn't return, not even in daylight. What ties these stories together isn't fear, it's reverence, a kind of reluctant awe. As though those who've brushed close to the unknown don't seek answers. They simply carry the encounter, like a scar beneath the skin. The Hawkesbury doesn't court spectacle. It doesn't offer easy access or dramatic reveal. What it does offer is resistance, to intrusion, to interpretation, to being tamed. And perhaps the monster, whatever it is that resistance made flesh, a physical embodiment of the river's refusal to be known. Some cryptid theorists have shifted from biology to psychology. They argue that the monster is a manifestation, a projection of communal unease, a symbol conjured by generations of subconscious tension. They point to how the river was once a site of violence, displacement, trauma, how the original custodians of the land were forced from it, how their stories, when not erased, were twisted to fit settler narratives. In this view, the monster becomes the river's answer to forgetting. A reminder that memory, even when buried, will rise. But maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe the creature is just what so many have claimed it to be. A beast, old and large and stubbornly alive. And maybe that's miracle enough. That in a world mapped by satellite and ruled by logic, something enormous could still move undetected, seen only when it chooses to be. One thing is certain. Whatever it is, it doesn't want to be caught. Every attempt to pin it down has ended not in failure, but in redirection. The river shifts. The signals fade. Cameras fail. Drones crash. And yet the sightings continue, like tide markers on the shoreline of the unknown. And that, more than anything, gives shape to the creature. Not its back or neck or eyes, but its persistence. The way it returns, uninvited and unimpressed, every time we try to bury the idea of it. The way it waits, just beneath the surface, for someone to stop searching and simply listen. In 2019, during a particularly dry summer, a section of riverbed near Maruta receded to expose what looked like deep scoring marks in the sandstone. Not natural erosion, not boat damage. Parallel grooves, long and clean, as if something vast had dragged itself across the stone long ago. The marks were documented, photographed. Then the rains came, and the river rose again, covering them in mud and silence. The people who saw those marks don't argue about what made them. They don't post theories or call news crews. They just remember, like the river does, because that's the thread that ties all of this together. Not proof, not belief, but memory. Living, moving, resisting memory. The The kind that doesn't need validation to be true. The kind that returns in dreams, or in the stillness between paddle strokes, or in the way dogs sometimes stop and stare at water as if it's staring back. The monster of the Hawkesbury may never breach the surface for cameras. It may never leave bones or blood, but it doesn't need to. Its story is already etched in the silt, in the half-told whispers, in the way every silence on the river feels slightly inhabited. By now, the monster is less a creature and more a question. Not the kind you answer, but the kind that answers you. Slowly, quietly, in gestures instead of words, and always through the river. The Hawkesbury doesn't speak in headlines or declarations. It speaks in changes, in currents, in weather, in what's seen when no one's watching. If you live here long enough, you stop asking, "What is it?" and start asking, "What is it trying to tell us?" There's a kind of reckoning that creeps in through these stories. A slow erosion of certainty. It's not about believing in monsters, really. It's about feeling the weight of something greater than your explanations, something that exists regardless of you. And that's the part that humbles, that unsettles. Not fear, but smallness. Standing on the bank with a torch, knowing that for all your light, the dark remains vast and undisturbed. Some call it myth, but myths are not lies. They are truths that refuse to die, wrapped in story to survive the journey. And the Hawkesbury's myth endures not because of proof, but because of what it awakens. It reminds people, city folk and bush folk alike, that there are still places in the world where not everything is accounted for, where presence precedes understanding, where the land remembers what people forget. In the tiny riverside cemetery near Wiseman's Ferry, there's a headstone for a man named Walter Finnegan, born 1889, died 1963. No known children, no surviving family, but etched into the stone, beneath the name and dates, is a single line: he listened. Locals say Walter was one of the last to keep the old waterways by hand. No engines, no lights. Just rope and knowledge passed through calloused fingers. He used to row out at dusk, drop his lines and wait. No radio, no books, just the slow, rhythmic creak of timber and the endless patience of the river. Some say he saw the monster once. Others say he never spoke a word about it. But everyone agrees on this. After he came back from one night alone near Big Island, he never fished again. Just sat on the bank for years, looking out. Stories like his don't end. They taper. They settle into the soil like seeds, waiting to be unearthed by someone asking the right question at the wrong time. And when they are, the silence that follows speaks louder than any confession. In 2021, a group of ecology students from Sydney University installed audio sensors near a series of deepwater channels as part of a long-term aquatic life monitoring program. For months, the devices picked up routine patterns: boat engine, fish movement, the occasional underwater landslip. But then, across 3 different sensors and 3 different nights, something else was recorded. Low, resonant pulses, repeating at irregular intervals, below known animal frequencies, too structured to be ambient noise. The data was submitted, reviewed, dismissed as equipment error. But the technician who first flagged the anomaly? He never deleted the files. He keeps them on a flash drive, tucked into an old Altoids tin in his desk drawer. He plays them sometimes, late at night, just to hear it again. That sound, slow and deliberate, like something breathing, waiting. The stories won't die because the river won't allow it. It continues to offer its presence in glimpses, in wakes that move with no wind, in sounds too deep for birds or boats, in the way mist clings too long to the surface. And even when it's quiet, it's never still. There's a man in Gunderman who's built wind chimes from found bone and river drift. They don't ring like metal. They thud and clatter softly, like bones remembering what it means to echo. He doesn't sell them, doesn't explain them, just hangs them from the eaves and says they keep the river honest. And maybe that's what all this has been, a way of keeping the river honest, of not letting it fade into something ordinary. The monster, whatever it is, gives the Hawkesbury back its voice, not in roar or scream, but in that breathless moment when you think you're alone. And soon the sun will rise again over the sandstone cliffs. Boats will push off from the docks, Dogs will bark at shadows they can't name, and the river will glide on, holding close whatever truths it deems too wild, too old, too sacred for daylight. Morning on the Hawkesbury arrives slow, unhurried, as if the river itself resists waking. Light pours in through the gum branches in slanted bands, pale and golden, illuminating dust and mist as one. Birds call cautiously at first, as though checking if the night has truly passed. And the water forgets nothing. Its surface smooths, yes, but beneath, always beneath, something stirs. Not in motion, but in memory. So we end where we began, with a river that has carried more than boats and fish and runoff. A river that has carried stories, questions, shadows, and through them all, the whisper of something vast beneath its skin. Not explained, not disproved, just there, persisting like heat in stone. The Hawkesbury River monster may never rise for the camera. It may never offer bones for study or tracks for plaster casts. Because maybe that's not its purpose. Maybe its purpose is presence. To remind us that for all our science and stories, there are still places in the world that remain unmapped. Not in coordinates, but in meaning. The river doesn't need us to believe. It doesn't swell or sigh in response to doubt. It simply flows, season after season, holding secrets in currents too deep for sonar and too slow for fear. And somewhere in those folds, the creature waits, not for us, but through us. As if our gaze is just another ripple in the long history of those who've come, watched, and left changed. And what of those who never saw it, never heard it, but felt it? They're the ones who can't pass a quiet bend in the river without pausing. Who watch the surface longer than they mean to. Who speak a little softer at the water's edge, as if something listens. Because something always does. Not all monsters are curses. Some are mirrors. Some are warnings. And some are guardians of the spaces we refuse to let die. The old places, the wild places. The places that remind us that knowing is not the same as understanding. To those who have seen it, heard it, dreamed it, know this: you are not alone. Your story, whether shared or buried, belongs to the river now. And the river, in its patient winding way, remembers. The bush speaks, the cliffs echo, the water watches. And you? You were never meant to know everything, but you were meant to listen. Confessions you were never meant to hear.